Hey guys, Zomfox here. The UFL schedule for the 2025 season came out just a week ago, and it is already time to rank every single schedule from easiest to hardest. Now, while some might say this is a little bit premature, we pretty much know roughly 5 teams that we expect to be anywhere from good to great, and 3 teams that have to kind of prove to people that they're not going to be bad once again. As well as knowing which cities have a real home field advantage, we are able to make this video this early. As well, yes, some big things could change. We pretty much know what a lot of these teams are. So without further ado, let's get started with number 8, the easiest schedule, the St. Louis Battlehawks. Let's just put it very simply. They are the Battlehawks. They don't have to travel to St. Louis because they're the St. Louis team. I mean, duh. Right, the Battlehawks at home is one of the toughest places to play purely because of the insane crowd they're going to have. They're always going to have 30K plus attendance. So they're very tough to play at. So obviously the Battlehawks don't have to play themselves. Now, while those 5 teams I mentioned, 3 of them are XFL teams, meaning that the Battlehawks are hurt by that, since they have to play 2 of those good teams twice. The one caveat is one of those teams is San Antonio, who many would say at this moment is the second best team in the entire league, only behind the Stallions. Yes, we ended the season last year with the Panthers ahead of them, deservedly, but the Panthers are missing far more big name players than the Brahmas are. So at this moment, the Brahmas are the second best team in the league. The Brahmas play here twice. Right, we'll get to it later, but the Brahmas essentially, because of a lot of scheduling conflicts, got kind of screwed over this season to where they're only going to have 4 home games, and their 5th home game went to St. Louis in St. Louis. So the toughest battles that the Battlehawks have to play are the Stallions and the Brahmas twice, and all 3 of those games are at home. Your first 3 games are at Houston, which, yes, the rebirth of TDECU in spring football, that's going to be a tough place to play at least that first game, but against the Roughnecks, not super tough. Then you get at home against the Brahmas and then at home against DC. You get a pretty easy first 3 games due to the fact that it's Houston, DC, and then the Brahmas at home. Then you also get the Panthers at home. The 2 other teams of those big 5 are the Panthers and Stallions. And I already mentioned the Stallions, but the Panthers, you're playing them at home. So of the 4 biggest games, really the 4 biggest, well, technically it's more so like the 5 biggest, DC, I mean, not DC, Arlington and all that. The only tough one is traveling to Arlington in week 4, and even then, Arlington is not one of the premier places in regards to a home field advantage. It was definitely better than a lot of other teams, but it's still not, it's not DC when DC's good and their Audi Field is packed. It's not St. Louis. So you have the tough game at Arlington, and everyone else is at home. The Brahmas at home both times. The Panthers at home. The Stallions at home. So the Battlehawks deservedly get the easiest schedule of the year next year because, again, they're tough games while they are in the tougher XFL conference. It's just not that difficult when you're getting to play the Brahmas at home twice and your 2 best USFL teams have to come to you. Number 7 is the Stallions. Obvious caveat out of the way, the Stallions do not have to play the Birmingham Stallions because they are the Birmingham Stallions. The best team in the league until they lose basically 2 in a row is the Stallions, and we kind of got proven that last year. I kept saying that, even when the Stallions lost to the Brahmas, you had to keep them number 1 because they were the best team, and they proved it. As of now, they're obviously still the best team by a mile because nobody can beat them. At least beat them, and then beat them again. Now, they do also have a just somewhat easy schedule, all things considered, right? Now, they do have to travel to St. Louis, which is definitely, a negative that sucks. They have to go there, and that hurts because last year they got them at home. But San Antonio does have to come to Birmingham. So both those are flipped, right? Last time the Stallions had to travel to San Antonio and the Battlehawks had to come to Birmingham. Now it gets flipped. So yes, it does suck that they have to go to St. Louis, which is a tougher place to play in San Antonio. But you still get one of those teams at home. Then you do have to go to Michigan. Obviously that sucks. We have to because of the Panthers in your conference. But you have the benefit of the Roughnecks and the Showboats. 2 of those 3 teams that nobody really expects anything out of are the Showboats and Roughnecks. So the Panthers and Stallions get a huge boost there, considering that they get 4 games that, by all accounts, they should go at least 3-1 against. So you have to give them a huge break there. Now, they do have to travel to DC, and DC is a tough place to play. Though last year, the attendance was definitely inflated from season tickets and tickets bought. Actual attendance was much less than it was. But if DC is good, they're going to pack that stadium, and it's going to be a very tough place to play. Granted, DC is the weakest XFL team right now. Their starting quarterback, as of now, is the weakest in the entire league, since Emory Jones, who already was arguably the weakest starter in the league, is now not going to be in the UFL since he got a reserve contract. Even with a QB, the Defenders are still the weakest team in the XFL conference. So, yes, it sucks you have to go there, but it's not like St. Louis, where St. Louis is still a really good team. You have to go there. DC, not as much. You open the season at DC, so even if they are end up being good, you get that out of the way early. It's just a very beneficial schedule. Not to mention the Renegades do come to town. So two of those big three XFL teams come to you. This is number 7, pretty obvious. Now, number 6 is the Panthers. 6 and really the next couple of spots are pretty close to each other, but for the same reason with the Stallions initially of the 4 games that are against the Showboats and Roughnecks, putting them at 6. You have to travel to Memphis for your opener, and then you get 3 consecutive home games. Now, it's good and bad. It's good, obviously, you get 3 home games initially. It's always better to start off hot than end hot. I've said that multiple times due to the fact that, for example, the Broncos and Steelers in the NFL this season. Both those teams have played like trash the last few weeks of the season. Yes, the Broncos got a huge win against the backups of the Chiefs. Both teams played poorly. The Bengals outplayed both of them. The difference is, the Steelers and Broncos had a great early season. Bengals didn't. 2 teams made the playoffs, 1 didn't. You always want to start off better. So the first 4 games, the Panthers have the not-so-difficult task of going to Memphis to play the Showboats. Then you have the Stallions and Brahmas, which are both great teams, but you get them at home, so you could definitely beat them, and then you get Memphis at home again. So you do get your 2 Memphis games out of the way pretty quick, meaning that worst-case scenario, you should be 2-2 in that stretch, but arguably 3-1. Now, you do have to travel to St. Louis and Arlington, but as we said, DC, the later in the season you play DC, the worse it could be, because if DC ends up being good, their attendance is going to get really good. That's what happened in the past. So getting them at home is better than when the Stallions go to DC, in my opinion, but it does suck you have to go to Arlington, but at the end of the day, you get Houston and Memphis 2 times within 4 weeks twice. In fact, you get the Roughnecks 2 times in 3 weeks. So if the Roughnecks end up not being great like they were last year, where they were terrible last year, you get 2 games that should be free wins within 3 weeks of each other. So Panthers come in at number 6 because of that. Number 5 is going to the Memphis Showboats. Again, this was pretty tough. The 6 to like the 3 spot were pretty close to each other, especially the 4, but putting the Showboats here. So the biggest benefit is you're not in the XFL conference, right? We talked about it before. The XFL has 3 really good teams versus the USFL's 2 really good teams. Of course, heading into the season, what we expect. So benefit there. Now, if you're the Showboats, you don't have to travel to St. Louis. You get them at home. So you don't have to travel there, so that makes that a much easier game than it could be. DC, again, you're at DC early. As I said, if DC's attendance is going to be really, really good, it's more than likely going to be at the end of the year if the team ends up being good and they end up getting better and better attendance. So it's not the worst thing that you have to travel there early in the season, which does mean you get Arlington at home. So you get 2 of those big 3 teams of the XFL at home, and the one you don't want to go to in DC, you get that early on. And then, yes, you do have to travel to San Antonio, which is definitely their toughest game in the second half of the season, because, again, that is at San Antonio. You get the Stallions, Renegades, and Battlehawks at home. But, again, it's also, like I said, the early season. There is a potential for the Showboats to start 2-1 to start the season. Lose to Michigan, beat DC, beat Houston. Then you do have to travel to Michigan and Birmingham in weeks 4 and 5, which definitely are really tough games. But, again, with the Showboats, it's one of those things where, like, yes, they don't have as many easy games as teams like the Roughnecks do, for obvious reasons. But at the same token, this could be a lot harder. I think that overall 6, 5, 4, pretty close to each other. I think the Showboats deserve the 5 spot. Now, the 4th hardest schedule of the 2025 UFL season, I'm going with the Houston Roughnecks. Again, you're not in the XFL conference. You don't have to deal with 4, big teams as well as 2 others in the other conference. The Roughnecks also get St. Louis at home, so they also get a pretty big break there. Then they travel to Arlington, then travel to Memphis, then the Stallions, and they have to go to San Antonio. Why do I have them as a harder schedule than the Showboats? Mainly because this first half is tougher, right? Having to go to San Antonio, this game is a big deal because this is the first home game for the Brahmas. Remember, the first 4 weeks the Brahmas can't have a home game. This is their first home game. San Antonio usually has a good crowd for the first game, so really tough place to play. Then obviously you do have St. Louis and Birmingham, but they are at home, so there's a benefit there, but then having to travel 2 places, especially since you couldn't beat Memphis last year, the second half of the season is an easier overall. You get DC at home, so even if they are good and they end up having a good crowd, you're not going to have to deal with it. Michigan at home, Memphis at home, at Birmingham, and at Michigan. Those are your 2 tough games. But overall, I think the Roughnecks are very similar to the Showboats. It's just that The Showboats have a better chance to start 3-2 than 2-3, whereas the Roughnecks have a better chance to start 2-3 versus 3-2 kind of deal, and end the opposite. Like I said, I'd rather a team have easier games initially because you can kind of get lucky by winning early. You have to get really lucky to win late. Number 3 is the Renegades. The Renegades, obviously the XFL Conference, aside from the Battlehawks just getting a huge break with San Antonio traveling to them twice and being the Battlehawks with a huge home field advantage, the XFL is a tougher place to play this year, right? Last year, heading into the season, we thought the USFL Conference was going to be tougher because we expected the Showboats to be a much better team than they were, and the Brahmas to be much worse than they were, whereas this year it's the opposite, so watch it be the opposite again. But we expect the Renegades, Battlehawks, and Brahmas all competing to be a playoff team with minimum 6 wins. So it's a tougher conference heading into the season from what we expect. With the Renegades, right, why are they at 3 below the other 2 as an easier schedule? Well, number 1, they're not the Brahmas getting stuck with only 4 home games. And number 2, I think their schedule honestly is just, DC has to play the Brahmas, Renegades, and Battlehawks twice. The Renegades don't. So they're the odd man out here. Now, as for them to actually talk about them in a sense, they get 4 home games in the first 5 weeks. So you want to talk about potentially starting the season out hot, you could easily start 4-1 with the schedule. Yes, you have San Antonio, Birmingham, and St. Louis in the first 5 weeks. But Birmingham's your only away game in that stretch. It is very possible they could start 4-1 in this stretch. And then it basically doesn't even matter the second half as long as they win like 2 games. And those 2 games, of course, can be Memphis, and if DC isn't good, DC. Now you also get Michigan at home. So that 3-week stretch right there, weeks 7 and 9, if you go 2-1 in that stretch and you go 4-1 to start the season, odds are the week 6 and week 10 games at St. Louis and at San Antonio don't even matter. So number 3 for them. Again, because the teams they're playing are tougher overall, I have to put them above these USFL teams in terms of difficulty of schedule, right? Again, if you're a team like the Panthers, right? You play the Stallions twice, and you have 3 other tough games against the XFL Conference. Whereas the Renegades, you have 4 of those in-conference games, and then 2 more games that are really tough. And when you add that extra one with DC potentially being that really tough one, pending how good they are, you see what I mean? Number 3. Now, coming in at number 2 is going to be the Defenders for the most obvious reason. They have the toughest schedule on paper in terms of which teams we expect to be good. They are the only team in the entire league that, on paper, has to play 8 tough games. The Stallions at St. Louis, Brahmas at Arlington, at Michigan, at San Antonio, versus Arlington, versus St. Louis. 8 tough games. Because, of course, they're the one XFL team that isn't expected to be really good, so they have to play those 6 games, and they get to play the USFL Conference, which has 2 great teams. Now, what makes it even worse is that only one of those USFL teams do you have at home, and that's the Stallions. So, you don't even have the benefit of, saying, at least we get the Stallions and Panthers both at home. Not even. Really tough schedule. When you talk about their first 4 weeks, odds are they might go, if they're 2-2, you take that. At St. Louis is going to be a really tough game. Then, of course, you do get the Stallions and Brahmas at home, so you might be able to pull off a win there. But then you have at Arlington, at Michigan, at San Antonio. That is an awful 3-game stretch right there. Just because you're talking about 3 really, really good teams that we expect to be really good, that's going to suck to have to do. Especially when before that you have at St. Louis and the Brahmas, and afterwards you have the Renegades again. Then you end the season with the Battlehawks. I mean, come on. Look, we can talk about all we want, right? The Defenders, as of right now, don't have a quarterback, right? Their starting quarterback is the weakest in the league at this moment. And even with Teamu back, it's not like that's going to be a huge boost to the team. Everybody pretty much saw that last year. The Defenders are pretty much in a very bad position. They're going to have to be a team that really rises above expectations, much like the Brahmas and Panthers did last year. That's what the Defenders have to be, because at least with the Showboats and Roughnecks, they have a lot of changes overall with their roster or their staff. The Defenders, not as much. They're just going to have to be a shockingly good team, whereas the other 2, if they end up being good, we can at least say why it is. But this team, that would be shocking. Number 1 is the Brahmas. This is obvious. I mean, this is a cop-out answer. You have 4 straight road games to start the season because of the whole issue with the scheduling conflicts at home. Those games are at Arlington, at St. Louis, at Michigan, at DC. If DC does get off to, let's just say, like a 2-1 or even a 3-0 start, that week 4 game is going to have a lot of people there. If that happens, you have 4 insanely tough games to start the season. At worst, 3. If you go 1-2 in that stretch, you're insanely happy. And this goes back to what I said earlier. You want to start off the season better than how you want to end it. Because yes, while you want to end the season hot heading into the playoffs, you have to make the playoffs. If you're the Brahmas, you really hate the fact that your home games are at the end of the season. Now, what also sucks is both Michigan and Birmingham are your 2 away USFL games. That's right, you get the Roughnecks and Showboats at home. Now, granted, in theory, those should be 2 free wins, but the fact you have to go to Michigan and Birmingham, to most people, is probably 2 losses. So you go 2-2 in the USFL Conference, you take that. Then you have to deal with the XFL Conference. You might get swept by St. Louis purely because you have to travel to St. Louis twice. Then you have the DC game, which could be really bad, and the Renegades game. There is a possibility that just because of how unlucky their schedule is, they end up winning only like 4 games, go 4-6, or even 3-7, despite being a great team. And that would purely be because of the fact they just get really unlucky with their schedule. Start off slow because you have to travel to 3 different places against really good teams, and then a 4th that could be really good or could not, right? If you're the Brahmas, you're hoping the Defenders are as bad as people think they're going to be. That week 4 game isn't too bad. You get 4 wins, 2 against the Defenders, 2 against the USFL Conference, and then you just hope you win one other game and win by tiebreaker. Now again, that's purely using the, you're going to lose on the road kind of mantra. If you split the series against the Renegades, it's a different story. Look, the Brahmas, like I said, are still, in my opinion, the 2nd best team in the league right now, above Michigan because Michigan lost a few key players and still waiting to re-sign, whereas San Antonio is pretty much set and they're fine. But this is the toughest schedule in the league by far because of the fact they have to travel to St. Louis twice and start on 4 straight road games. Yes, the Defenders technically have a tougher one in an overall just, how many tough games they have, but they have the benefit of a more spread out home and away schedule. While it's not super spread out, it's still better. It's 3-2 in regards to 3 in the first half of the season, 2 in the second half, whereas the Brahmas are 1-3, and even that 1 is at the end of week 5. So, it is what it is. The Brahmas coming at number 1, the hardest schedule for the 2025 UFL season. So that'll do it. This has been ZomFox. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Let me know down below what your thoughts are on the schedule rankings. Are there a couple teams you would change? What are your overall thoughts on teams as of right now? Again, as it stands in my overall super early postseason or preseason power rankings, like I said, I'd say there's 5 teams that are clearly better than the other 3. The Brahmas, the Stallions, the Panthers, the Renegades, and Battlehawks at this moment, heading into the season, clearly look to be the class of the league, which I say class of the league and I say 5 teams, but you know what I mean, right? The Defenders, Roughnecks, and Showboats have to prove something, whereas these other 5 teams, either through the end of the season with the Renegades, what they did across the season in the Panthers, Stallions, and Brahmas, or the fact that they underperformed and still were good in the Battlehawks and look to be just as, if not, revamped, those 5 teams are clearly the better teams, at least at this moment. So again, let me know what you guys think down below. If you've been a fan of the channel for a while, think about becoming a community member for as low as 99 cents a month. Exclusive video every month. This week was the NFL playoff bracket, my bracket, as well as team emojis, community posts, other stuff like that. Be on the lookout for my State of the Channel 2025 video. It's going to come out this month. I don't know when. We'll see. And as always, guys, have a great night.